The sound does not come. That is the genius of it. On a darkened street in occupied Paris, November 1943, a Gestapo officer emerges from a café on the Rue de Rivoli. His leather overcoat is buttoned against the autumn cold. He has murdered 17 French resistors that month alone. He does not hear the shot that kills him. The weapon produces no bang, no crack, no report that echoes across the rooftops. Instead, there is merely a soft, metallic whisper, quieter than a closing car door, softer than the shuffle of footsteps on wet pavement. By the time his body crumples onto the cobblestones, the assassin has already melted into the blackness from which he came. This is the Welrod pistol, perhaps the most ingenious instrument of silent death ever devised by the British engineering mind. For nearly 80 years, its very existence has been denied, its effectiveness shrouded in official silence, and the true extent of its operations locked away in files that remain classified to this day. Yet the weapon itself is real. The men who designed it were real, and the agents who carried it into the darkness of Nazi-occupied Europe, they were very real indeed. The Welrod emerged from a paradox of total war. By 1940, with France fallen and the entire European continent under Nazi domination, Britain found itself in an extraordinary position. It could no longer fight the enemy with conventional armies in conventional ways. Instead, it would wage a different kind of warfare, one conducted in shadows by invisible hands. This required new weapons, weapons unlike anything that had ever existed. The War Office, in consultation with a shadowy outfit called the Special Operations Executive, began to contemplate what such weaponry might look like. What they needed was a pistol that could kill a man in complete silence. They needed it to be reliable enough to function in sub-zero conditions and in the damp of occupied Europe. It needed to be compact enough to fit inside a coat pocket, light enough to carry through an entire day of dangerous work. And it needed to be simple enough that a secret agent, operating under the most intense stress imaginable, could fire it accurately at close range without failure. At the same time, the weapon had to be impossible to trace. No Nazi laboratory should ever be able to examine it and determine that it was British in origin. Each component had to be either anonymous or deliberately misleading. This was a challenge that seemed, to most observers, simply impossible to solve. Standard silencers of the period were unwieldy things, bulky steel tubes that transformed a pistol into something more resembling a plumbing fixture than a concealable weapon. They were also inefficient. Most would reduce the sound signature of a .45 caliber pistol by perhaps 15 to 20 decibels. The noise remained obvious, distinctive, damning. What the planners needed was something fundamentally different. They needed to silence not just the muzzle blast, but the supersonic crack of the bullet itself. Most weapons designers would have said it could not be done in such a compact package. Most weapons designers would have been wrong. The weapon that emerged from this requirement was developed at the Welrod factory in Birmingham, a facility so obscure that few people even knew it existed. The chief designer, working alongside a small team of metallurgists and engineers, created something genuinely revolutionary. The Welrod was chambered in .32 ACP, a relatively modest cartridge that fired a small-diameter, lightweight bullet at low velocity. This was the key to the entire design. At such low speeds, the bullet itself did not break the sound barrier. Without a supersonic crack, without that characteristic rifle-like snap that travels through the air at over 1,100 meters per second, the weapon became something entirely new. The suppression of the muzzle blast became a matter of straightforward engineering rather than an engineering impossibility. The barrel itself was threaded, and onto it could be screwed a baffled silencer of compact dimensions. The entire silencer, which was built into the weapon's design rather than added to it as an afterthought, contained 7 stages of expansion chambers. These chambers were packed with rubber and steel baffles that broke the expanding gases into smaller and smaller clouds, dissipating the sound energy progressively. A single shot from a Welrod produced a report of approximately 73 decibels, quieter than a ringing telephone, roughly equivalent to the sound of a typewriter keys striking paper. The weapon weighed barely 500 grams. The overall length was only 190 millimeters. It could be held in the palm of one hand. It looked rather like a particularly squat fountain pen if you happened to glimpse it in poor light, which was the only light in which one was likely to encounter it. The pistol operated on a simple blow-forward principle. When the small, .32 caliber bullet left the barrel, the rearward motion of the slide was arrested by a mechanical catch. The slide would not cycle. There was no dramatic snap, snap, snap of the bolt moving back and forth. Instead, to chamber the next round, the shooter would manually pull the cocking piece at the rear of the weapon. This made it a single-shot instrument, or more precisely, a weapon that required a deliberate manual action between shots. To an observer unfamiliar with the design, it might appear that the gun had jammed. This was partly intentional. In the chaos of a nighttime assassination with the agent desperate to escape, the Welrod forced a moment of discipline. Shoot. Cock. Aim. Shoot. There was no possibility of wild spraying, no chance of empty shells clattering to the ground to give the shooter away. Each round was a conscious decision, a deliberate trigger pull separated by a full second of preparation. The magazine, when loaded, held 8 rounds. The entire weapon could be assembled or disassembled in under 2 minutes by someone who understood its mechanism. The designers had even thought to include a small tool integrated into the magazine itself, allowing the weapon to be modified or adjusted without additional equipment. The weapon was produced in several variants. Some versions featured a slightly more powerful .38A CP round, offering greater stopping power at the cost of audible report. Others were manufactured with marginally different dimensions to suit different concealment requirements. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 Welrods were manufactured during the Second World War, though the exact figures remain, unsurprisingly, classified. The facilities at Birmingham operated under extraordinary security. The workers employed there knew only fragments of what they were producing. Many never understood that they were assembling instruments of assassination. The component parts were manufactured separately, sometimes at different facilities across the Midlands, to prevent any single location from understanding what was being created. The barrels came from one place, the stocks from another, the magazine assemblies from a third. The silencer baffles were produced in such small numbers that individual manufacturers could not reasonably deduce their purpose. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. It genuinely does make a difference to the channel, and it allows us to continue researching and producing these scripts about the hidden corners of history. The operational deployment of the Welrod was secretive and remains incompletely documented to this day. What we do know comes from fragmentary records, declassified documents of varying reliability, and the accounts of surviving agents. The weapon saw its most extensive use in occupied France and occupied Belgium, distributed through SOE networks to assassins and saboteurs operating in the darkness. There is documentary evidence of at least one confirmed assassination of a high-value Nazi target carried out using a Welrod, though the regulations governing classified wartime records mean that most operational details remain officially unavailable. What we do know is that the weapon was particularly favored for the elimination of Gestapo and SS officers, and for the suppression of enemy informers within the resistance networks themselves. The French resistance was not a unified force but rather a collection of competing, often mutually suspicious groups. Internal traitors and German double agents were a constant threat. When such individuals were identified, the Welrod became the instrument of execution. The psychological effect was considerable. A Gestapo torturer found shot in his quarters, with no sound of gunfire reported by any neighbor, produced a particular kind of terror. How had the killer entered? How had they escaped? How could anyone be safe when death could come in utter silence? There are reports from German security documents of officers requesting reassignment away from resistance active zones, citing the uncanny efficiency of the resistance killings. Whether these documents are genuine, exaggerated in translation, or products of post-war fabrication remains uncertain. The records are too fragmentary to allow definitive conclusions. The Welrod's technical superiority becomes clear when compared with the German equivalent. The Nazis possessed several silent weapons programs. The most famous was the Volkscarbine, a semi-automatic rifle with an integral suppressor, but it was bulky, heavy, and unreliable in the harsh conditions of occupied territory. More relevant for comparison is the Pistolgab 30 variant, a conventional pistol fitted with an external silencer. The German suppressor was considerably larger than the Welrod's integral design, produced significantly more audible report, estimated at 85 to 90 decibels, and the add-on configuration made the weapon less. The Germans also experimented with the Narbenflinte, an unusual flare gun converted to fire .32 ACP ammunition with a silencer. This weapon was even less reliable than the Welrod and prone to catastrophic failures. The American OSS, in their infinite practicality, simply did not produce a purpose-designed silent assassin's pistol. Instead, they equipped their agents with modified commercially available silencers attached to standard handguns, a solution that was crude by comparison and significantly less effective. The British Welrod was, by any objective measure, the most sophisticated and genuinely silent weapon of its type produced by any nation during the Second World War. The actual impact of the Welrod on the outcome of the war is difficult to quantify with precision, and historians remain divided on the matter. It did not win battles. It did not change military strategy. No general directive issued from Berlin was modified because of the Welrod's existence. What the weapon did do was provide the resistance movements with an instrument of remarkable efficiency. A single agent carrying a Welrod could eliminate a high-value target, an informer, a Gestapo torturer, a Wehrmacht liaison officer embedded within local occupation authorities, without raising an alarm that might trigger sweeping reprisals. The psychological impact on both the occupying forces and on the morale of the resistance populations cannot be easily measured, but was certainly significant. Officers began to request posting out of resistance-active areas. Morale amongst collaborators began to crack. The knowledge that death could come without warning, without sound, without the possibility of defense, is a corrosive thing. It undermines certainty. It creates hesitation. It sows doubt in the minds of those who believe themselves secure. These are not material effects, and yet in the long struggle of occupying forces against popular resistance, they matter considerably. The Welrod also served a valuable propaganda purpose for British intelligence. The existence of such a weapon, when it became known to resistance movements, suggested that London was thinking about their problems in innovative ways, that British engineering was devoted to their cause, that they were not forgotten. The weapon became, in a sense, proof of British commitment to liberation. The Welrod's legacy extends far beyond the Second World War. The fundamental principle upon which it operated, the use of low-velocity ammunition and integral suppression to achieve a genuinely quiet gunshot, became the template for all subsequent silence weapon design. Modern suppressed firearms, from military special operations weapons to civilian sporting arms, operate on principles directly descended from the Welrod. The Russians, examining captured examples after the war, incorporated Welrod design concepts into their own silent weapon programs. The Cold War saw the development of even more sophisticated silenced handguns by the Soviets, the Americans, and later by other nations. But the basic engineering philosophy remained grounded in principles that the Birmingham designers had worked out in the darkness of wartime. The weapon itself has become something of an icon of espionage history. Filmmakers and novelists have borrowed heavily from its mystique. The very concept of the silenced assassin's pistol, elegant, deadly, intimate, owes much to the Welrod's real historical existence. A handful of genuine examples survive in museum collections. though many remain in locked cases, their full significance still not publicly acknowledged. The Imperial War Museum in London holds one example. There are specimens in private collections, though the existence of these is often not widely advertised. Some examples were dumped at sea by departing resistance fighters as the war ended, their secret purpose ensuring that they would be destroyed rather than captured. Others were carefully preserved by individual agents as souvenirs of the strangest war ever fought. To hold a Welrod in your hand, and those who have done so report this consistently, is to hold something that feels wrong in a profound way. It is far too light. It is far too small. It makes no sense as a weapon when you first encounter it, and yet it is devastatingly effective. It carries with it the weight of all those stories that will never be told, all those names that will never be known, all those silent deaths that change the course of history in ways we have only begun to understand. The Welrod represents a peculiarly British solution to a wartime problem. It was not the most powerful weapon ever created. It was not the most advanced technology ever devised. What it was, instead, was precisely fit for purpose. It was elegant in its simplicity. It was ingenious in its approach to an apparently insoluble problem. The weapon emerged from the darkness, did its terrible work, and then retreated back into the shadows from which it had come. The records remain classified. The true number of kills will never be known. The names of most of those who used it will never be revealed. The factories that built it have long since been converted to other purposes. The designers have passed away, and no official monument marks their contribution to the secret war. Yet the weapon endures as a testament to British ingenuity under pressure, to the capacity of the engineering mind to solve problems that others insist are unsolvable. In a war of total ideological struggle, where nations fought not merely with armies but with every resource of human creativity, the Welrod represents a quiet statement. It says simply, "We are thinking about this problem. We will not accept that it cannot be solved. We will find a way, however unorthodox, however secret, however morally troubling, to give our agents the tools they need." The Welrod was not a large gesture. It was not a dramatic weapon. It made no thunderous declaration of British power and determination. Instead, it whispered. It whispered in the darkness of occupied Europe, and in that whisper, countless lives were changed. The silence of the Welrod, the very silence that made it so effective, is perhaps the most fitting monument to the entire secret war that Britain waged in the shadows. It killed without announcement. It changed history without acknowledgement. It remains to this day largely unknown to those who walk the streets of Paris or Brussels or any of the other cities where its work was done. And yet, it was there. The Welrod was there, whispered in the dark, and history was altered by the sound of nothing at all,